Hello. And apologies, I missed Fridays. Today, 51. I missed the day. Literally fell asleep as I was putting down my son, and behold, it is now 3 o'clock on Saturday morning. I've woken up and I'm combining the two. So yeah, let's get into it. Um, so I'm gonna combine the 2 days of Leviticus 22 to 25 effectively, and just breeze through these again. Um, it is 3 o'clock around this time. Zachary normally tries to wake up again, so I'll be quick so that I don't have to rush off mid review. But God's carrying on with the exposition on the laws given to the Israelites, and we've got some rules for the priests, in which they're to present themselves, the treatment of the offerings that's given. They're given permission to eat the offerings, but no one else is to eat the offerings, except for maybe a slave that they've bought or their children. Now, what's really interesting as well, especially with the where is it? Yes. This. If a priest buys a slave for himself, the slave may eat from the sacred offerings. It makes me feel like when Christ said, was man made for the Sabbath, or was the Sabbath made for man? And it's this idea of the law seems to be given for various reasons, but one of which is definitely not the detriment of the people. If a priest has a slave, that's all that the slave is going to eat what the priest eats, because else what else would they eat? And as much as the offering is set apart for the priest, it seems like that's never at the cost of human integrity, human dignity, but rather, there seems to be a need, a desire to care for those that are there. On the one hand, the priests don't have any other work, so this cares for them. But on the other hand, anyone in the priest's family, even a slave, this also allows for them to at least not go hungry, So and there's an emphasis on the perfection of the priest, but then also on the perfection of the sacrifices. This whole section on flawless animal sacrifice, for flawless animals for sacrifice. Now, the reason I think, as we go through, you'll notice, there's a specific standard that the animals need to meet in order to be considered worthy of a sacrifice to God. And I was thinking on this, and I think, on the one hand, having a animal that meets a certain standard, needing to meet a certain standard, again, raises the value of what you're doing, right? It raises the value of what you're presenting the animal for, raises the value of who you are presenting the animal to. All of these things, I think, are in one way meant to remind the people to revere their God. On the other hand, all of these things, I think, are because they need to fit a certain pattern. So it's very clear, even from here, that God is intentionally setting a precedent, setting a pattern that needs to be followed, that needs to be met in order to sufficiently point to Christ, who becomes the perfect lamb, at the point of crucifixion. And he sets all of these criteria up so that when Christ comes and meets that criteria, we can't be ignorant and say it wasn't him, because there's such a specificity around what the lamb, what the sin sacrifice is supposed to be. Now, when Christ then meets it, it's all the more emphasizes, all the more points to him. This is what Christ was saying when he said the entirety of the text points to Christ. And when he said that at the time, this is what they had. They had the Torah, the prophets, um, the history, and then the wisdom. And all of it points to Christ. Now, in chapter 23, and I've got this pulled up in what's it called? I can't think. I've got this pulled up in interlinear form, so you can see both the NLT and the KJV. One of the ways I like to watch it sometimes. Anyway, we go on to the laws for religious festivals, and God sets out, I think it's 8 festivals altogether for the people. I'll run through just the festivals that are mentioned. So there is the every Saturday, the Sabbath, the Passover, Festival of Unleavened Bread, Festival of First Fruits, Festival of Weeks, Festival of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Festival of Tabernacles. It's really interesting, right? I won't go into detail on every festival. I don't know the detail of every festival, but these are set up and are established for the people to remind them of certain things, to remind them of, the festival of the Passover, to remind them of when God passed over their houses and bringing them out of Egypt. Festival of shelters is to remind them that they lived in Egypt. They lived in shelters in the wilderness. And so part of the festivals are to remind them of what God has done in bringing them to where they are and making them the people that they are. And if you keep on a yearly basis, reminding yourself of what God has done, then you will, remind yourself to honor him, to give him the reverence that he's deserved. But some of the festivals, like the Festival of First Fruits, also, I think, is to point to where your fruit comes from, where your sustenance comes from. I've been reading this, was literally thinking about HMRC. So those in the UK, HMRC is a tax man, and our money the tax man grabs his part of it even before it gets to us. And so we really know who's in control, that the government is in control in this country. I think when you bring the first of the fruits of your harvest, it's like a reminder of where your wealth really comes from and who's really in control. And I thought it's really cool seeing how God set this up for them. It's the other thing I noticed throughout all of the festivals, pretty much, there's a theme of rest. On the festival days, you don't do any ordinary work. You rest. You take the time. And as much as there's like, you bring something, an offering to God, you're also being literally forced to rest. And the society would, if they followed these, would have such repeated times of resting. That would be amazing. Very, very, very different from our modern day hustle culture of just go, 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 go. This was literally centered around rest, reverence, remembrance for what God has done, worship, and gratitude. It's quite impressive. 24, we go into a few rules around the bread and the sanctuary again. But then also specifics around like injuries that are caused, and a fracture for a fracture, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And again, Christ will refer to these and say they were given because of the hardness of men's hearts. This was, again, God sort of reigning in the society and the culture, which is quite interesting. And then Leviticus 25 is all about the sabbatic year and the year of Jubilee, and sort of rules around economic practices for the people. Again, I suggest that you can't have this a read, but I asked AI to comment on what the economic climate would be if Israel or any society followed the rules that are set out here, like religiously. If they really followed the rules, if they really stuck to this, what would that society's economic atmosphere be like? And I will just read the summary. The overall economic character. So the prompt was comment on the economic sort of atmosphere if Israel followed the rules given in Leviticus 25 perfectly. And his AI's response. This is Claude's response. If faithfully observed. Now, again, I asked for the response not necessarily because AI can offer anything unique or insightful, but rather by prompting it to make an economic what's the word I'm looking for? To comment on what the atmosphere would be economically for the people. I'm asking it to sort of look at its wide database of economic practices and standards and compare that to what's laid out here. So I don't want to treat AI as though it's going to give you some revelation, but rather in making a comparison here. Again, you're just comparing text that's out there, you're comparing data, right? This is what I came up with. If faithfully observed, Israel's economy would have looked quite unlike anything in the ancient world, or arguably in the modern world. It would have been characterized by broadly distributed land ownership, with no entrenched aristocracy or landless peasant class, sustainable agricultural practices, strict limits on exploitative lending, a strong sense of communal responsibility for the poor, and periodic system-wide resets that prevented runaway inequality. Wealth could still be accumulated and industry was rewarded, but a structural ceiling on permanent accumulation and a structural flaw preventing permanent destitution would have created a society with a remarkably narrow gap between the rich and the poor. This is one chapter. These are the economic rules given by God, and it should point us to what God really wanted of his people, what a theocratically ruled, devoted people society would look like. I think that's incredible. It actually goes on to point out that there is little evidence historically that Israel consistently practiced this. And that would also account for why prophets such as Amos, Isaiah, and Micah so passionately condemned, particularly the accumulation of wealth at the expense of the poor. That was never God's design. Anyway, we're back on track for day 52. And so, God willing, I'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow's readings are, let me bring it up. Leviticus 26 to 27. It says today because I've read today's one already and marked it as read. And so it sort of skips to the next one and adjusts. But tomorrow's reading will be Leviticus 26 and 27. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. Apologies for missing a day. But we're here and we're back on track. Peace out.